wonder why some people face devastating tragedy in their lives and seem to never recover, while others face similar circumstances and seem to thrive? Just so I won't feel alone, can you raise your hand if you've ever experienced struggle? Oh, I feel so much better. Thank you. You know, I've faced struggle, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. In fact, all of us, really, we all face struggle of one kind or another, and it may be something like loneliness or discouragement, disappointment. Maybe it's bullying or poverty. Maybe it's abuse or neglect, or maybe even the death of a loved one. The fact of the matter is, I didn't say some of us will face struggle. We all do. We all face struggle. And it depends on what we're going to do with it. So we can, when we face this struggle, some people choose some wrong choices and they spiral downward and they become very discouraged and they make even poorer choices with sadder outcomes. But research shows today that social media really compounds this problem. So let's think about it. On Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those things you're familiar with, we actually curate or pick out the things we want people to see. We put the pictures that we want. We make sure we say it just right. And, you know, it can make the rest of us feel like, gosh, we look on social media and everybody's having fun. Their houses are perfect, their children are adorable, and their vacations are spectacular. But you know what? Who do we turn to when we're in the midst of the struggle? And we are having a very difficult time. Probably not the perfect people on social media. Instead, we'll probably seek out someone who's had a similar trial and maybe who were courageous and transparent enough to share that. These three people sure were. The first is a little girl who grew up in rural Mississippi. Her mother moved away to the north and she had to live with her grandmother. At the age of 9, she was raped by a cousin, and later she was molested by a friend of the family, and then later an uncle. As an adult, she found out that she had a half-sister she didn't even know about. But despite all of these difficulties, Oprah Winfrey became one of the most influential women in the world. It's amazing, isn't it? I have a friend who grew up in Nicaragua. He doesn't have any arms, and his family moved to the United States to seek better medical care and really a better way of life. He was teased mercilessly by kids in the neighborhood and kids at school, and really people were staring at him all the time. So he decided to learn to play the guitar with his feet, and sometimes he practiced 6 or 7 hours a day. All of that hard work paid off when Tony Melendez was invited to play for the Pope. Tony Melendez, I know him, and I know him to be one of the most joyful people I have ever met. In fact, if you can believe this, I have watched him unlock his front door with his feet and go in, and I have also watched him pull up and hitch his trailer to his SUV with his feet, back the trailer out in his car, and drive away, driving with his feet. Incredible. There was a student at a university who was editor of the school newspaper. It was a prestigious school, and he was later kicked off the staff. But he continued writing under a pen name. In fact, he graduated and kept writing, this time children's books. His first book that he ever wrote was rejected 27 times before it was published. And his wife committed suicide. You know him as Dr. Seuss. Theodore Geisel, otherwise known as Dr. Seuss, went on to write more than 60 children's books, which were translated into 20 different languages. And Dr. Seuss, if you go in any household that have children, you'll probably see Dr. Seuss books there. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, I'm overwhelmed and my problems are too big. I recommend that you seek out a friend or a teacher or a counselor. Lots of people are there to help you. You see, the truth is, there are walking wounded all around us, all the time. And if we're really honest, we're all wounded in some way. A wise woman once said to me that one's wound can become one's gift when we choose to share it with others. And it really empowered me to think back on the struggle in my life and be willing to share it. You see, I'm the youngest of 4 children. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And my older brother, Hal, who was 14 months older than I, had Down syndrome. Hal died tragically when I was 10 years old. And it was devastating, absolutely devastating. In high school, I battled anorexia. And in college, I battled bulimia. I was throwing up probably 20 times a day. And I'm just grateful to be here to tell you about it. You see, I carried a lot of shame about that. And I thought no one can ever help me. And if they can, I certainly won't tell anybody about what I've been doing. Because of my eating disorder, I got to college and really struggled with my grades. In fact, I was put on academic probation, which made me feel like a failure. Later in my 20s, I experienced panic attacks, which were immobilizing and terrifying. And my husband and I later dealt with infertility. Need I say more? So if you're sitting there thinking, I have all these problems and I don't know if I'll ever survive, or if anybody has ever said to you, you'll never amount to anything, I want you to remember these words. You get to decide. Are the struggles in your life going to define you, or are you going to become stronger for it? So Oprah and Tony and Dr. Seuss made a decision to allow it to propel them forward. If you're really struggling, and if you know someone that's struggling, you may feel like, well, let me go back for just a moment. People ask me, what was it like to lose your brother? And this is the only way I could think to describe it. Imagine, you've got a huge gash in your leg. It's bleeding profusely. And someone's pouring alcohol in it. Oh, and then they're taking a scrub brush and they're scrubbing it out. You really think you can't take anymore. It is so painful. But you know the amazing thing about our bodies? When we sustain a cut, our blood begins to coagulate immediately. Of course, it still hurts and it's oozing and it's awful. But eventually, a scab will form there. And it'll get smaller and smaller until all that remains is a scar. You know the incredible thing about a scar? It's actually stronger than your regular skin. So you may know people who are struggling. You know what? They feel like they're in a pit. And you can do one of 2 things. You can either choose to walk over to the edge and look down your nose at them and say, I'm so sorry. And then walk away thinking, I'm so glad that's not me. Or you can choose to be compassionate. And compassion literally means to suffer with. When the compassionate person is when there's a person in the pit and the compassionate person comes over, they look down in the pit and then they crawl down in with them. And they sit shoulder to shoulder. And they ask things like, what can I do to help? May I share part of my story with you? Or would you like for me to just sit here with you? You know, the truth of the matter, our life is just like an airplane flight. There's a long runway of childhood and adolescence, gaining speed as we go. But eventually, we'll lift off. And for those of you who have flown before, you know that can be a little bumpy, sometimes even a white knuckle experience. But here's what the pilots know. They know that at a higher altitude, they're going to find smooth air. That's what they're seeking. Now, unfortunately, sometimes there's a lot of clouds between where you are and the smooth air, but you got to get up through it until it evens out. But here's the other thing that pilots know. Even on a beautiful day without a cloud in the sky, you could still experience turbulence. This is life. It will be turbulent. Just know, when you look on Facebook and Instagram and everything looks great for everybody else, no, it's not true. We all are going to struggle. We all will. So, what do we do we have a choice. I guess we think, you know, we're all hardwired for struggle. We all are. I wouldn't want to go back and relive any of my life's experience where there was suffering, but I can say I'm stronger and more compassionate for it. Remember, there are walking wounded all around you, and your wound can become your gift if you choose to, if you decide to use it to help other people. Thank you.